Welcome to the Inspiring Tech Leaders podcast with me, Dave Roberts. Today's episode looks at Apple's recent move to clamp down on vibe coding apps in the App Store. Now, if you haven't come across that term yet, don't worry, all will be explained. But more importantly, we'll explore why Apple is pushing back, what this means for developers, and how it could shape the future of AI-powered software creation. So, let's get into it. To start, let's define the concept at the center of this story, which is vibe coding. Vibe coding refers to a new wave of AI-powered tools that allow users, often with little or no programming experience, to create apps or software simply by describing what they want. Think of it as coding through conversation, powered by large language models. These tools have exploded in popularity because they dramatically lower the barrier to entry. Suddenly, you don't need years of experience in Swift or JavaScript, you just need an idea and the ability to describe it. And that's precisely why they've caught Apple's attention. According to multiple reports, Apple has begun blocking updates for certain apps in this category, for example, apps like Replit, and others offering AI-driven app creation directly on iPhones. Now, it's important to note, Apple hasn't removed these apps entirely. Instead, it's preventing them from pushing updates unless they make significant changes. So, what's the issue? At the heart of Apple's concern is how these apps operate. Many vibe coding platforms allow users to generate and execute code dynamically, essentially changing the app's functionality on the fly. And that's where things get tricky. Apple's App Store guidelines have long placed strict limits on apps that download or execute code after installation. The reason is straightforward: security, privacy, and control. If an app can alter its behavior dynamically, it becomes much harder for Apple to review and verify what that app actually does. In other words, the app you approve today might not be the app the user is running tomorrow, and from Apple's perspective, that's a risk they're not willing to take. Interestingly, Apple isn't against AI-assisted coding itself. In fact, within its own ecosystem, AI-assisted development is not only allowed, but it's encouraged with tools like Xcode. But there's a key distinction. When AI is used as a tool to help developers write code that is then compiled, reviewed, and submitted as a static app, Apple is comfortable. When AI is used to generate and execute code dynamically inside an app, effectively turning it into a mini development platform, that's where Apple draws the line. Developers, however, are pushing back. Some argue that these restrictions are outdated in the age of AI. They point out that vibe coding represents a fundamental shift in how software is created, moving from static applications to dynamic, user-driven experiences. From their perspective, Apple's policies are limiting innovation and preventing a new generation of creators from building and sharing their ideas. And there's some merit to that argument. After all, we've seen similar tensions before. If we look back at the history of the App Store, Apple has consistently enforced strict guidelines around what apps can and cannot do. Every app must go through a review process that checks for safety, performance, design quality, and legal compliance. This model has been a cornerstone of Apple's brand, ensuring a curated, secure ecosystem, but it's also been a source of ongoing friction with developers. From game emulators to cloud gaming services, and now AI-driven coding platforms, Apple has often been cautious, some would say conservative, when it comes to new categories of apps. So the real question is this about security or control? The answer, as usual, is probably a bit of both. On one hand, Apple has a legitimate concern. Allowing apps to execute arbitrary code could open the door to malicious behavior, whether intentional or accidental. On the other hand, maintaining tight control over the App Store also reinforces Apple's position as the gatekeeper of its ecosystem. And that control has significant business implications. Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. AI is rapidly transforming software development. Tools that once required teams of engineers can now be built, or at least prototyped, by individuals using AI assistants. This democratization of development is incredibly powerful, but it also challenges traditional models. If anyone can create an app on the fly, what does that mean for app stores? For quality control, for monetization, and perhaps most importantly, for trust. From a leadership perspective, this is where things get interesting, because this isn't just a technical issue, it's a strategic one. Apple is effectively making a call about the future of its platform. Is it a tightly controlled environment where every app is vetted and predictable? Or does it evolve into something more open and dynamic, where users can create and modify experiences in real time? Right now, Apple is clearly leaning towards the former, but that doesn't mean the story ends here. Regulatory pressure is increasing, particularly in regions like the European Union, where alternative app distribution models are starting to emerge. Developers are becoming more vocal, and users are increasingly expecting more flexibility and control over their devices. So it's entirely possible that Apple's stance will evolve over time. There's also a deeper philosophical question at play. What is an app in the age of AI? Traditionally, an app is a fixed piece of software. You download it, install it, and it behaves in a predictable way. But vibe coding challenges that definition. It turns apps into platforms, into environments where software can be created, modified, and executed dynamically, and that blurs the lines between developer and user. For tech leaders, this shift has real implications. If your organization is building mobile experiences, you need to think about how AI changes the game. Do you embrace these new tools to accelerate innovation, or do you prioritize stability and control? And how do you navigate platform constraints like those imposed by Apple? There's also a talent dimension to consider. If AI lowers the barrier to entry for development, the pool of people who can create software expands dramatically. That's an opportunity, but it also raises questions about quality, governance, and oversight. As leaders, we need to think about how to harness this potential without compromising standards. So, where does this leave us? In the short term, developers building vibe coding apps for iOS will need to adapt. That might mean limiting dynamic code execution, restructuring how their apps work, or even moving some functionality off device. In the longer term, we're likely to see continued tension between innovation and control, because AI isn't slowing down, and neither is the demand for more flexible, user-driven software experiences. Let's bring this back to a practical takeaway. If you're a tech leader, there are 3 things you should be thinking about right now. First, understand the constraints of the platforms you're building on. Apple's policies aren't just guidelines, they shape what's possible. Second, stay close to emerging trends like vibe coding. Even if they're not fully supported today, they could represent the future of development. And third, be prepared to adapt. The pace of change in AI is relentless, and the organizations that succeed will be the ones that can navigate both the opportunities and the limitations. To wrap up, Apple's crackdown on vibe coding apps isn't just a niche developer story. It's a signal about how one of the world's most influential tech companies is approaching the AI revolution, cautiously, deliberately, and with a clear emphasis on control. Whether that approach will hold in the long term is an open question. But one thing is certain, the way we build software is changing. And as leaders, we need to be ready for what comes next. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for tuning in to the Inspiring Tech Leaders podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. You can find more insights, show notes, and resources at www.inspiringtechleaders.com. Head over to the social media channels. You can find Inspiring Tech Leaders on X, Instagram, Inspo, and TikTok, and let me know your thoughts on Apple's new restrictions on vibe coding tools. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in tech.